First, tonight we're going to follow one of the traditional forms of learning with the American Indians. That means no pens, no pencils. It's an oral culture. The way that they taught their children, starting at about 10, was to repeat stories. And then the next evening, the children had to tell the stories themselves to the elders. It's a skill to be able to listen and not write. That's the good news. The bad news is that we're going to be giving all of the PowerPoints to the instructors the next 2 days, so if they do have questions for you, you can follow up with them. But tonight we want to talk a bit about sustainability as it relates to the American Indian culture. So, what is sustainability? These are just some of the definitions that you will read. I like this one, meeting today's needs without compromising the needs of future generations. I like this one too, an important point. There are ecological, economic, political, and cultural implications in sustainability. I like visual diagrams. So what are the 3 pillars of sustainability? You'll hear this. The first is clearly the environment. But there are also economic demands, because you can't look at just the environment without thinking about the economy. But there's also social equity. These are often referred to as the 3 E's in sustainability. And the trick, of course, is to find the right balance. If some of you came in earlier, you saw this prologue that was repeating itself with a little bit of history. But I think it's important to understand that when the first Europeans came here, we had approximately 5 to 10 million American Indians here. The space that they had was enormous, 350 acres per person. Things changed rapidly. We're not going to be talking much about the history today. Those of you who are juniors will attend some of my lectures tomorrow on history. Tonight, we'll really be trying to focus on what their cultural traditions can help us understand about sustainability. So, in that diversity of the American Indians, 550 tribes, you have certain unifying themes. They're reoccurring. You cannot talk about any people as though they are a unity. They're all a diversity. But very few people will argue that there aren't unifying themes within American Indian culture. I'm an adopted member of the Crow tribe. It's always interesting to ask what's someone's point of view. Matthew gave you a history of some of my interaction with the American Indians. So what are those fundamental values that we see? I think it's interesting to note that in 1910, Ernst Thompson Seton founded the Boy Scouts based on American Indian values. If you go back and look at the documents that were written by the Scouts in those days, you'll see these values: reverence for nature, respect for your neighbor, charity to your neighbor. They're a little different, interrelated. And one of the most important, from their point of view, individual self-reliance. So how do these correspond to the 3 E's? I'm giving you a little preview before we talk about some of the culture in more detail. Reverence for nature. That's an attitude or a value that really helps to focus our understanding of the way we look at the environment Some people may look at the environment as something that's there for us to take. Is it just taking? A statistic that I haven't checked out, but I read, which means it's 50% probably accurate, is that if every person in the world were to have the same living standard that we have in the United States, it would take all the natural resources of the world 6 times over. 6 times over. Now, let's just say it's off and it's only 5 times over. It can't happen that everyone can achieve the level of the standard of living that we have. So how do we respect the environment? Charity to your neighbor. You're going to see some extreme examples of that with the American Indians. It's a principle. It's an important principle. I can't tell you how to balance it, but it's something that you can help understand your own position on it once you hear what other cultures have to say. And then social equity. Respect for your neighbor. We live in a multicultural world. Lots of different problems with different peoples, but also individual self-reliance. Very important, individual self-reliance. We're going to start by looking at the environment from the point of view of the American Indians. So what is the source of American Indian reverence for nature? They have an idea, and again, this is perhaps not every American Indian, but a vast, vast majority, of a great spirit who is above and beyond all things, but also within all things. There are those historically, anthropologists, who would say that they were pantheists and they thought that each of the animals was a god. Not at all. Their creation stories are as varied as the tribes, but one of the themes is that the Creator first created the earth and the animals, and only then man and woman. So the animals in the creation myths and stories often help the Creator with the blooming, the blossoming of the earth and the peoples on it, all before man and woman came. So many of these stories, again, emerge from primordial waters. But it's this relationship that is important. So for them, they look at the Creator through the animals, this one great spirit. Each religion has a defining manifestation, theophany. So it could be a person, as it is in Christianity and Buddhism. It could be a book, a word, as it is in 3 other major religions. But in the case of the American Indians, that defining manifestation is virgin nature. So they look at the Creator through virgin nature, not through the Christ, not through the Torah or the Bible, but through different aspects of virgin nature. From their point of view, virgin nature is infused with a divine power. They don't just look at the symbol, they look through it. You'll see some examples. So for them, they learn about the different qualities of the Creator by studying the animals. There is a phrase, mitakuye oyasu. It's actually Lakota, but if you participate in a sacred ceremony with almost any Indian tribe, at the end of that ceremony, you will hear this phrase repeated in one or another of its translations. And it can mean all things are related, or we are all related. And when they say that, they're not just talking about people. They're talking about nature. So it is a very profound relationship. The notion that if you hurt nature, you're hurting us. In the American Indian way, again, this is almost completely universal. Each person can have a mini revelation in the form of a vision. You'll hear vision quests often. It's a major rite of passage for most young people. The visions give teachings that accentuate one or another of the different understandings they have of the Creator. And in fact, they keep medicine bundles close to their teepee or their home or whatever it would be that have a totem or a reminder of that animal spirit that's there to help guide them. It's a recurring reference for them. And this really infuses a sense of power and a sense of, if you will, individual self-respect for each of these people. What's also important is that they will never argue about a person's spiritual beliefs, something that we can all learn from. A number of the religions are exclusive, and we can't fault them for it, because from many people's point of view, you have to find a spiritual way. You have to find your value system. But the American Indians are the most inclusive of all spiritual beliefs. They do believe, that each of the religions is valid and that there are many different paths to the same Creator. So it is, again, I believe, one of the most inclusive of the different belief systems. This gentleman is a fascinating gentleman. He was born, as you see, in 1858, Charles Eastman. He was born in a buffalo hide teepee in Redwood Falls, Minnesota. He thought his father had been killed by the whites. So he was raised until he was 15, being ready to go on the warpath to avenge his father's death. His father had in fact been pardoned by President Lincoln, came to collect him, and this man went on to become a medical doctor from Boston College, graduated from Dartmouth, helped co-found the Boy Scouts of America. He was given in 1929 a medal at the World's Fair in St. Louis as the most important American Indian of the previous 50 years. His books, most of which were written from 1902 to 1909, are one of the best glimpses we have of American Indian history and culture of that time by someone who lived in both worlds. This is what he had to say about a daily rite of purification. And I can tell you that this rite of going down and bathing in the cold water every morning, even in the winter, was something that my own Indian father, Thomas Yellowtail, did until he was 85. So this is a rite. But the other important point here, I think, is that the mate, whether it's a husband or wife, may precede or follow him, but never accompanies him. Each soul must meet the morning sun and the earth and the great silence alone. The point here is daily purification in nature, but also individual self-reliance. We'll keep seeing that and hearing that. I think it's important to touch briefly on the spiritual roles of men and women in this culture, because they're completely equal. Almost all of the celestial messengers, the Buffalo Cap woman of the Lakota who brought the sacred pipe, a woman. The messenger who brought the corn to the Pawnee, a woman. So women have visions and are intercessors with the sacred. They have many of the same ceremonies. They are equal participants. They also have some of their own, but they are equal participants in what really are the three major ceremonies that really recur with most Indians. Certainly the Plains, but most Indians have a sweat lodge, a vision quest, and a daily prayer, in the case of the Plains Indians, with the pipe.
We participate in the sweat lodge ceremony throughout the year to prepare ourselves for the Sundance. So it is an important part of the Sundance religion. When a person has the proper intention and observes all of the rules, the sweat lodge purifies the person not only on the outside, but also throughout his inner being. The sweat lodge is called the little brother of the big lodge, the Sundance Lodge. It is similar in construction. You cut 12 small poles from tree saplings and bend them over and tie them together. You should say a prayer before cutting each tree, because the tree has allowed us to use it for our prayer ceremony. I have already spoken about the meaning of the form of the Sundance Lodge, and this meaning is also true for the sweat lodge. We should always offer a smoke and prayer before and after each sweat lodge ceremony. We will bring sweet grass, sweet cedar, or sweet sage into the lodge and purify the whole lodge with the smoke before we start. We can also purify the lodge with the smoke from the kinnikinnick tobacco used in the pipe while we pray. When everyone is in the sweat lodge and the doors closed, we begin to say our prayers. As we pray, we throw dippers of water on the rocks, and steam fills the entire lodge. The prayers are the same as the Sundance prayers we have talked about. All of the participants should be praying right along during the entire ceremony. Everyone may not be praying out loud. That doesn't matter. But one should pray in one's heart during the sacred ceremony. That is the purpose of the ceremony, to purify the participants both inside and outside. There is no light in the lodge except the red glow of the hot rocks. The smell of the sacred incense fills the air. We have entered into another world, which is beyond our physical world. When the water is thrown onto the rocks, the heat does not merely cleanse us on the outside. It also goes all the way into our hearts. We know that we must suffer the ordeal of the heat in order to purify ourselves. In that way we can re-emerge from the sweat lodge at the end of the ceremony as new men who have been shown the light of the wisdom of our spiritual heritage for the first time. This allows us to participate in all of our daily tasks with the fresh remembrance of our position on the earth and our continuous obligation to walk on this earth in accordance with the sacred ways.
The vision quest is a rite of passage for every young person. By your age, you would have already gone on a vision quest.
Before a man goes out on a vision quest, he must first consult with a medicine man. A man must be humble before the great mysteries will grant him anything. A humble man will ask for guidance from a spiritual man. The instructions for the prayer may depend on the young man's intention. It is very important to undergo a purification before and after every major undertaking. So he must take a sweat bath to prepare for the vision quest. Right after he or she is through with the sweat bath, the vision seeker will go and spend 3 or 4 days upon the hill or high mountain. In the olden days, the man going out to seek his vision would wear a buffalo robe, moccasins, and sometimes a loincloth. When he reached the area of the retreat, he removed all of his clothing and was exposed to nature, unless he covered himself with his robe while he slept. I instruct those who ask my advice to follow the traditional way of the old-timers. When a person is on a vision quest, he must have certain attitudes and intentions for his prayers to be sincere, and then he must carry these over into his daily life. If you participate because you know the purpose of the rites, and you want to express your gratitude and love of the sacred ways, then you may eventually receive a great reward. For those who have been sincere in the solitary invocation, Akbadadia will send a reward in the form of some medicine power. There are many different medicines a person can receive in different ways, different animals, different birds, or one of the powers of the universe. When a person returns to the world after a vision quest, he must take a sweat bath, using sage to purify himself again before he gets back among his people. Then the meaning of the vision must be explained by the medicine man at home. The medicine man knows what must be done by the recipient of the medicine in order for him to protect it. The recipient of the medicine usually is instructed to make a medicine bundle that will preserve and protect the medicine power. These bundles serve as a constant reminder of the spiritual gifts we have been given and the corresponding attitudes which must always be present in order to safeguard our spiritual blessings.
Every tribe has a rite of both tribal and world renewal. They're very different. The commonality is that it exists. Some tribes would have a winter dance, some a harvest dance, some a dance in the summer. For the plains, the sun dance is that rite. But it's not just for the tribe. The people believe that if the dance did not take place, the world would literally end. So it's a world renewal for the entire world. We'll look shortly at the sun.
This is the remarkable story of the preservation of an ancient cultural and spiritual way of life, the Sundance Way. Although the form of the Sundance varies amongst the tribes, the intention of personal, tribal, and world renewal through days of suffering and prayer is a common theme. Spiritual leaders from many tribes fought to maintain the Sundance of their grandfathers in the face of a government bent on its destruction.
We'll talk briefly about the symbolism of the Sundance just so you can understand some of the relationship between the different animals and the Creator. Because the center pole, which is what all of the different rafter poles come to, really represents the place where heaven touches earth at that particular time. This probably 1978. On the center pole, you have both the buffalo and the eagle here, resting. The eagle represents all of the creatures of the sky, and of course the buffalo represents all the four-legged animals. There is a great deal more that one could say about the Sundance. The film from which all of these came is here at Culver, if anyone wants to look at it. I think it's important to understand water because of its scarcity and the way it's being polluted. For the American Indians, our world and our people emerge from the primordial water. The water provides the daily purification. It is the means, really, of their spiritual death and rebirth in the sweat and in the vision quest. And it's the ultimate recipient of their sacred medicines. They put it in the water. And of course, pure water is essential for life. So for the American Indians, protecting the purity of water is integral to protecting their entire spiritual heritage. The Sweat Lodge uses water. And I can tell you, for those of you who participate in the sweat, it is an exercise in the control of desperation. It is a spiritual death. You will experience that, and when they open the cover, you are very thankful for your rebirth. James will treat you all well, but it is an experience that I recommend for everyone. The most intense suffering in the vision quest and the Sundance is the lack of water. Having been in the Sundance, it wasn't the food, it was the water that I missed. And the rites end by drinking sacred water as part of the spiritual rebirth. This is the sacred water song at the end of the Sundance. So let's look at economic demands for a minute. Charity to your neighbor, one of their core values, but we really need to understand what they meant by this, because the giveaway is the source of highest prestige for the American Indians. In fact, as you see here, all important events, births, naming ceremonies, puberty celebrations, receipt of any honor. This summer, the function of Sundance Chief of the Crows passed from Leonard Benz, who was a great nephew of my father, Yellowtail, to a grandson of Thomas Yellowtail by the name of Thomas Yellowtail. The moment after the ceremony in which Thomas Yellowtail was invested as the new Crow Sundance Chief, he had a giveaway. The whole family brought all sorts of things into the lodge and gave them away. This is one of the greatest honors he could be given. First thing he did was a giveaway. And any notable triumph and deaths. Whoops. This is a very interesting photo because the widow is giving away, literally, all of her husband's possessions after his death. It's classic. People are lined up to receive all of these gifts. Sitting Bull, one of the most famous Indians of the last, 2 centuries ago now. He worked in New York City for 4 months with Buffalo Bill. Same question, over and over and over. How can there be so much poverty? He gave away almost all the money he earned to the hobos and newsboys. This is what Sitting Bull had to say. Someone who was in fact murdered to start the Ghost Dance rebellion, if you will, in 1890. But these are the thoughts of a man considered by many in our government at the time to be a savage. Hardly the thoughts of a savage. I like the final line. We both pray to the one God who made us all. Social equity. This is a balance. Because with the American Indians, they didn't want just, if you will, to give away something or to have no respect. These two elements had to be in balance. What are the reasons for most wars? Of course, quest for territory, material wealth, natural resources, and religion. They didn't really apply to the American Indians. For First Peoples, the reason for war was to attain individual and tribal honor. Of course, there were always wars at the boundaries of the territory, but they never harmed women and children. They almost never scalped prior to the interaction with the Europeans. As those of you who attend the history lecture tomorrow, the first bounties for scalps were given by the U.S. In what is called King Philip's War, one of the early wars. So the mutilations and bounties were started by the whites. Of course, as tribes were driven to the west, it was a very difficult circumstance competing for shrinking land. But how did a man become a chief? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Highest honor. They didn't get any points for killing an enemy. There were 4 things you had to do to become a chief. You had to steal a horse. You had to capture a weapon in hand-to-hand combat. Talk about individual self-reliance. You had to lead a successful war party. And you had to count coup. This is a fascinating painting. You see what's in this warrior's hand here? That's a quirt. Those of you who are horsemen and women have seen that. There was more honor in touching, coup, the French word, an enemy than there was in killing. So those are the 4 ways to achieve it. And then respect for your neighbor's religion. This is my father, Thomas Yellowtail, that ended up spending a year of his life in my home in Indiana. And I spent that much time with him after 71 before he passed in 93. The words you've been hearing in the film are him speaking, no clips. So his word really helped to explain a little bit more about the Sundance Lodge, but also the relationship of the Creator to the Creator.
You have given different ways to different people all over the world. As we know, This earth is round like a wagon wheel. In a wagon wheel, all the spokes are set into the center. The circle of the wheel is round, and all spokes come from the center. And the center is you, Aqaba Nadia, the maker of all things above. Each spoke can be considered as a different religion of the world, which has been given by you to different people and different races. All of the people of the world are on the rim of the wheel, and they must follow one of the spokes to the center. We all pray to the same God, to you. Help us to see this wisdom. Aho. Aho.
Let's come back now to the three pillars of sustainability. We've got economics, we've got environment, and we've got social equity. How do we balance these issues to find a solution? I can't tell you the answer. I can only help you understand the questions. This is pretty much evident to all of you, but I think it bears repeating. You can't find a solution to a problem unless you can agree on shared principles. Finding a common ground have to happen. Then, step 2 is to agree on the relative importance to give to each of the shared principles. But if you cannot agree on those shared principles in the first place, there's no hope for the second. There's no discussion. That's the challenge. So how do we identify the shared principles? I would assert that we look at history and we look at other cultures. We understand what history tells us about similar situations. We look at other cultures and the values they have. And we understand how they would deal with some of these problems. Of course, the time is different. The facts are different. But we have to inform ourselves in this way, or there's no meaningful discussion that can take place. So what do they teach us about sustainability? I'm going to change a word in a minute, but the economic demands, yes, there has to be charity to your neighbor. I've changed reverence for nature to respect for nature. I'm not going to expect everyone to have a reverence for nature, but you better respect it. And you need to understand that in the quest for material improvement everywhere in the world, it can't all happen. Again, it would take 5 to 6 complete Earths, all the natural resources in the Earth, to have everyone in the world have our natural resources. I've traveled most of the world. I spent 40% of 8 different years traveling around the world and visiting different cultures. I can tell you that the environmental degradation in many parts of the world is just terrible. How do we balance these issues? Social equity, respect for your neighbor's religion and culture. Changed it a little because I've added religion and culture. Uh-oh, I see someone with a pen. No pen zone. You can have all these tomorrow. And individual self-reliance. Very important principles. If we can't respect the culture and the religion of other people in an ever-shrinking world, what's the world going to be like in 40 or 50 years? If these values don't apply, what alternatives are there? Anyone have an idea for me? You need to think about it. Does anyone have a question for me? I tried to wrap up in 45 minutes so that we could have time for questions.
How did you first become involved with the Crow Indians?
I'm sorry?
How did you first become involved with the Crow Indians?
How did I first become involved with the Crow Indians? I was a student at Indiana University. There was a professor there by the name of Joseph Epps Brown. He is the man who lived with Black Elk for 2 years in 1947 and recorded his story of the 7 sacred rites of the Oglala Sioux. I was very fortunate to be his graduate teaching assistant for 3 semesters in the course on religious traditions of the North American Indian. He arranged for me to spend the summer of '71 with the Yellowtails. I got 6 hours of credit for it. I would have gladly done it without that credit. But that really started this lifelong relationship with the American Indians. Please.
Have you ever had a vision quest?
The question is, have I ever had a vision quest? No, I never went on a vision quest. The Sundance is considered by many to be a variation of a vision quest because the fasting is the same. You're within a lodge instead of isolated in nature. But no, I did not.
Out of everything you've learned from your studies, what do you think is the singular most important thing that you have learned from these Indian tribes?
That's a good question. What is the singular most important thing that I have learned from the American Indians? And I'm going to have to think about that. You should ask me tomorrow, and my answer may be a little bit different. I think with the American Indians, when you understand both their history and their culture, it is remarkable that they have persevered against all odds, against a government bent on their destruction. For 50 years, their religion was outlawed. They couldn't even meet in large groups. The children were taken away. They were put in boarding schools. Their mouth was washed out with soap when they spoke about in their native language. In 1971, when I lived on the American Indian Reservation, a friend of mine told me that someone that I knew went into the local hospital, the BIA hospital, for an appendicitis. And 2 years later, they found out they'd been sterilized without their knowledge. I didn't believe it. I said it couldn't happen. It could not happen in our country. It came to light in early 1990 that 3.7% of the American Indian women of childbearing years were sterilized without their informed consent in BIA hospitals on reservations during the 1970s and early 80s. I couldn't believe it. If you look at everything, and I'm just giving you a few examples, if you look at everything that has happened to the American Indians, the worst poverty of any racial group in the United States, the worst treatment. Indian lands, there's less than, right at 1% of all land in the United States is still owned by American Indians. So 99% was taken away. Yet, they are the highest volunteer rate in the armed services. At the Sundance, they still raise the flag, the American flag, on the second day. And in World War I, the American Indians per capita bought $170 of war bonds, the highest purchase of war bonds by any racial group, higher than whites. Yet they are the ones in poverty. So there's a paradox of patriotism These are people who are trying to live in two worlds and balance and maintain the cultural values of their heritage while trying to survive in a modern industrialized world. They're trying really hard. They're doing a great job. They are persevering in ways we can't imagine, in unimaginable circumstances. That spirit is uncrushable. It makes my heart soar. And they really earn an undying respect for me with this cultural revival that is being really blossoming even as we speak in many, many reservations. That started. There was a question up here.
Like, what problems are facing American Indians today?
What problems? Wow.
Like, just some major ones.
The question is what problems are facing the American Indians. We will go over that if you're a junior tomorrow in the history lecture. But you've got 65% unemployment, at least 50% on almost every reservation. The health problems are the highest per capita. The drug and infant mortality, the highest. Tremendous, tremendous economic hardships. So the practical problems are really unbelievable.
I was wondering if you could take either one value or one practice from all of the cultures that you've studied and implement it, let's say, like on a national scale in America to improve sustainability and security. Which practice or value would you pick? You can only pick one.
That's an interesting question. Let me paraphrase it and see if I've got it. You're asking me really what I think is the most important quality that I see in traditional peoples or in different world cultures?
That we could benefit and implement.
That you can benefit and implement. Yes. Individual self-reliance, self-domination. What is happening with these people who are succeeding is that there is an indomitable will, despite odds you cannot even imagine. And they are finding ways to go to school. They're finding ways to get an education. They're finding ways to get a job. They're finding ways to balance this life in two worlds. So if you can learn any one thing from the American Indians, it's this individual self-reliance, indomitable will. Whatever the problems are, face them flat out, straight on. You, not your neighbor. Face them. It's remarkable. James Trosper, who you'll meet next year, just remarkable circumstances that he's pulled himself up from poverty. And if you hear him talk about it or you can ask him questions about it, all of the family and the children lived in one room. They couldn't afford anything. And yet he's about to get his master's degree. He's been for 10 years a trustee of the University of Wyoming. He's still a director of the Grand Teton National Park Foundation. He's the director of family services for the Arapaho tribe. This is a man who's dedicated his life to other people. I've told him that he can't yet speak the English language because he's never learned to say no. He's just always doing something for someone. That's an indomitable spirit.
If you could take the largest or most important problem throughout modern Indian lives, how would you fix it or manage it?
The question is, how would I fix the most important problem in Indian life? It's not a simple answer because I'm not king. The Congress can't agree on anything. The U.S. government certainly can't manage their money. They've mismanaged all of that. If I could, I would, amongst other things, set aside sacred areas in the national parks just for the American Indians. I would help create funds to return some of the tribal lands. I would also create various economic zones and micromanagement, micro-lending to help entrepreneurial activities on reservations. So it's not one thing, it's a variety of policies. But to help the American Indians, you have to do it consistent with their core values. So, first of all, these are ideas, and whatever I decided wouldn't work, you'd have to present them a smorgasbord of opportunities and let them choose. And it would be different on different reservations. But it would have to be something that allowed them this sense of individual self-reliance that is so important to them. At the same time, I would certainly want to promote education. So it's a multidimensional question, but there needs to be, in my opinion, more resources put to them. One of the questions that I'll ask at the end of my lecture tomorrow is, in fact, have we repaid the debt that we owe the American Indians? The follow-up really is the question you've asked. If not, how? But I think it has to be on their terms and consistent with their values.
I want to say thank you very much.